Hello. Hopefully, this transition will be the most awkward part of this. My name is Luke. For those of you that don't know, I'm pretty new to Grand Avenue. I moved here from Texas in July, so if I slip a y'all out, please don't kill me. It happens sometimes. I'm trying to curb that habit. But like I said, pretty new to Grant, but I've loved being a part of Grant. My wife and I moved here I can't go very far with that. My wife and I moved here from Texas to plant a college ministry at Oregon State. And so Brian and Jason have been super encouraging and coming alongside of us. And we really hope just to be able to partner in any way we can with Epic. Like I said, I'm married, been that way for about 3 years. And I'm excited to be here with you guys tonight to talk about manhood, partly because it was really in college when I started learning about what biblical manhood, what the Bible said about being a man looked like. And I'll never really forget that moment. I grew up in the church, but this was something that was never really talked about. So when it first hit me, it was just really mind-blowing. So it's one of those moments I never forget. I was my freshman year of college. I was hanging out with some friends. We went over to an upperclassman's apartment. He was probably like a junior. I don't actually remember what his classification was. But it just bared a lot of weight because he was an older guy hanging out with us younger guys. And I'm kind of quiet in new social settings. That's just my personality. And so he saw that. And so what he did is he came and sat down next to me and just in a really loud voice said, "Luke, do you want to know the secret to manhood?" And I was like, sure. And he had just got a soda out of the fridge. He held his can up to my face and looked very intently in my eyes. And he said, "Real men only open cans with one hand." And that's it. So that's all I got. We're going to break them into small groups. No, I'm just kidding. That's obviously a joke. But if anyone wants to drink this, be my guest. Obviously, that's a joke, and that's a ridiculous idea, a ridiculous notion of what would classify a man as. But I'm sure if we dissected our own definitions of manhood, there would be some ridiculous ideas. For me, if you picture in your head for a moment, your ideal picture of a man. For me, because I really like movies and I'm a bit of a nerd, my ideal man is Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings. Okay, my wife and I are also listening to those in audiobooks, and that affects that decision right now. But it's ridiculous to idolize someone like Aragorn because he's not real, and he has prolonged life descending from an ancient race of people. But he's rustic and attractive and mysterious, fights for what's good, destined for glory. And so that just really appeals to me. That's something I want to emulate if I could, but I can't. But honestly, I imagine that that's not your picture of an ideal man. And in fact, I bet if we had a picture of each of our ideals of a man, they would all be different. And that's partially because we are all wired differently. We all have different likes and interests. But it's also just because there's so many voices in the world that tells us what a man should be. If you think about social media is always telling us that to be a man, you have to have washboard abs and dress a certain way and be really funny and have ladies like you. Movies and TVs tell you gotta to drive fast cars, beat up the bad guys, be the hero. And honestly, the most influential perception we have on our manhood is our own personal experience, whether that is a father or grandfather or teacher or coach or just older figure in our life that has reflected on us what a man is. None of these, well, some of these could be bad, but some of these could even be good ideas of what a man should be. The problem is if we all have a different idea, a different vision of manhood, things get confusing. Things can get muddy. And when things get muddy and confusing, we tend to either become something that we can never be. We set expectations for ourselves that we can never reach, or we become something that we never wanted to be in the first place. We become something ugly that we never were intended to be. So something I want to do for you guys tonight is create like a baseline or a single vision of what a man should be. And if we desire to be men of God in this room, this definition or this vision should be from the Bible. And I have a lot to cover, so that's why I'm going so fast. So bear with me. If we know anything about the Bible, it's one of the many purposes of the Bible. It's how we know about God and how we know about ourselves because of Him or in light of Him. And unfortunately for me, in the purpose of this talk, there's not a book of definitions in the Bible. Like, how helpful would that be if right after Psalms was like this dictionary of like, this is what the God-inspired definition of this word meant, of what manhood was. That would be super helpful. But unfortunately, that's not in the book. And so I had to look to, in order to get like one statement definition, I had to look to an extra biblical source. So the definition I want to present to you guys, it's not in the Bible verbatim, but it is based out of biblical principles. It's from a book called What's the Difference by a guy named John Piper. And I generally trust this book for a couple of reasons, 4 reasons. One, John Piper is a lot older than me. He's got a lot of experience that I don't have. 2, he's a lot smarter than me. He has degrees I don't have. And he's probably read the Bible many more times than I ever have. 3, I can pretty confidently say he loves God more than me. If you've ever read any of his books or heard him speak, he just exudes a love for the Lord. And 4, and most importantly, the more that I have taken the ideas of this definition and the definition itself and held it up to Scripture, the more it seems to hold true. So this is something that's been really helpful for me. So I'm going to read this definition for you guys, and then we'll break it down and talk about it a bit. And this is that first slide. So the definition is, at the heart of mature masculinity is a sense of benevolent responsibility to lead, provide for, and protect women in ways appropriate to a man's differing relationships. So, like I said, I have a lot to go through, and that's because manhood is a fairly complicated topic. It's multifaceted. There's a lot of layers and nuance to this. So it starts out with that phrase, the heart of mature masculinity, which implies that there is more to manhood than the things in this definition, but there's not less than this. This is the very core, the foundation on which to build on, and if we can get this right, everything else will fall into place. Secondly, it specifies that it's mature masculinity, as to say that it's something you grow into. Like the process of sanctification is becoming what we already are, which is righteous and justified and blameless through Christ. So is manhood is similar to that, in that we were born as men, but we grow into a mature masculinity or mature manhood through Christ and the Holy Spirit. So if I go through these things, you're like, oh man, I really suck at this. There's hope for you, because you can still grow into this. It's something I'm still growing into. It's something I will continue to grow into for the rest of my life. The next phrase is a sense of benevolent responsibility. So the heart of masculinity is a sense of benevolent responsibility, which at first glance seems like just some fancy words to make this sound smart. But they actually have some meaning. So if you look at Genesis 1:28 through 30, it'll be on the screen. So if you want to look there, you can, but I'm going to be jumping around to quite a different places. And so they'll all be up on the screen. But Genesis 1:28 talks about the authority that God gives us, or God gave Adam in the very beginning. And it says, "And God blessed them. God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.'" So Adam was God made Adam. Well, God made everything else, and then he made Adam. Then God put Adam in the garden. And he gave him the responsibility over everything that was around him. Over the animals, over the fish, over the birds, over the garden itself. And his job was to be fruitful and multiply. And a lot of times we think about that as we hear that, and we traditionally think about like that's Adam and Eve populating the earth with people, which is certainly part of this command. But it's also a call to cultivate and grow and expand the garden from how God made it. So in other words, God put Adam in the garden not just to keep it as it was, but to expand it and grow it. And then if you continue on in verse 29, it says, "God said, 'Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth and every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food.' And it was so." So in other words, God gave Adam and Eve the fruit. So the fruit are for people, plants are for the animals. And what this tells us is that the responsibility of Adam was not just for himself and his own, but was for the animals as well. And so from the very beginning, when God created Adam, he created him and created his life so that it was not his own, but it was for himself and everyone else around him. And so like Adam, we have these responsibilities as well, that our life is not our own. And we see this especially in the fall in Genesis 3, when Eve eats from the garden and Adam eats as well. God doesn't go to Eve, even though she sinned first, but he goes to Adam and says, "What happened?" Because ultimately it's his fault, because he had the responsibility for her and to protect her, and he didn't. But like in the definition says, it's a benevolent responsibility. Benevolent is just a fancy word that means kind or well-meaning. In other words, God made Adam a gardener, not a dictator. His responsibility is to cultivate and nurture growth, not to force and lord over authority. And so, like Adam, our lives are not our own, and we have this sense of responsibility. And this our sense of responsibility is to lead. Now, like our ideas of manhood, our ideas of leadership are often skewed as well. You may think that leaders are the people in high positions that everyone works for, but that's not at all what the biblical idea of leadership is. And Jesus kind of comes, and when Jesus comes to the scene, he kind of turns this on its head. And we see this in Matthew 20:25 through 28. It says, "But Jesus called them to him and said, 'You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, to give his life for a ransom for many.'" So in other words, the idea that Jesus puts forth as leadership is to be a servant or to be a slave, even to the point of death, like Jesus died for us. And this is important to grasp, because what is contrary to the Bible in the world that we hear, the competing voice to this, it says if you want to be successful or lead, you have to be on top. You have to be the person that comes out of the fight standing up. But what Jesus says, is that no, you have to lay down your life to be the best, to be on top. It's viewing others as important, not yourself. And the thing about this is this doesn't require a position. Jesus says this to his disciples who were nobodies. It doesn't require position to lead. You don't need to be the front man to lead. My wife and I really like hiking. That's one of the reasons we've really loved living in Oregon. But a couple years ago, for our first anniversary, we went to the Grand Canyon to hike part of it. And if you've never been to the Grand Canyon, you really should sometime in your life. 10 out of 10, it's very grand. But one of the really incredible things about that hike, and about any hike really, is when you're doing something really hard, all the people around you, you kind of have this camaraderie that's really unique. And even though you've never met them in your life, you're like their best friend because you're doing this really hard thing together. So it was great because on our way down into the canyon, we were passing people that were just exhausted coming uphill. We were able to encourage them to say, "You're a few more yards to the next rest stop. You can get a drink around the next corner." And on our way back up, we were able to encourage people that looked really tired of going downhill, and we were able to say, "It's so worth it. You have to keep going." And that's how leadership really works. If life is like a trail, there's always someone ahead of you. There's always someone behind you. And the requirement for leadership is not a credential or a position, but it's just being a little further along than the person behind you. Take me as an example. I don't have a PhD in manhood. I have a few more years on you guys, and a couple years of marriage under my belt and a couple years of ministry under my belt. I'm not that much further ahead of you, but I can still give you these words of encouragement to help you move forward. And so you can lead from any position to anyone that's behind you on the path of life. Real quick, I want to give you 3 kind of practical ideas or practical ways that you can lead in any relationship. Number 1 is to advocate the authority of Christ. This means to advocate the authority of Christ, you have to submit to the authority of Christ. That Ephesians 5 passage in the Bible that talks about marriage gets a bad rap because it says, "Wives, submit to your husbands." But if you keep reading, it says, "Wives, submit to your husbands as husbands submit to Christ." And then goes on to say that husbands should live like Christ and die for their wives. So the wives are called to submit, but the husband's called to die. Which one do you want? But all that to say is that we have to submit to Christ first in order to lead. Similarly, it's submitting our lives to Christ, making him the priority, but also pointing others to Christ and his authority. We have to advocate the authority of Christ. 3 is mobilizing strength in others. Just on a principle, you should never do anything alone when you don't have to. Always take a moment as a teaching moment. Bring someone that's further behind you and bring them along and show them how to do what you do. Mobilize the strength of others around you. In other words, invest in the growth of others. And last is to take initiative. If you see a need, you should fill a need. Jesus didn't wait around for people to tell him what to do or to ask him to do something. He just went and did things. So this is what leaders do, and this is what godly leaders do, is they advocate the authority of Christ, they mobilize the strength of others, and they take initiative. Now the next thing that we bear responsibility to as men is to provide for and to protect. We provide and protect. I don't know if you've ever seen, like in high school TV shows, something crazy happens, and all of a sudden the jocks are just yell, "Protect the women!" That was always something I always thought was funny. But it's like our natural inclination. If you see someone about to get hit by a bus, I imagine your first thought is to help them in some way that you can. And so it's something that is naturally put inside of us to provide for and protect the people around us. And we see this in a passage in 1 Timothy 5, 1 through 4. I'll read this. Do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father. Younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters in all purity. Honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing to the sight of the Lord. So I put this on small font on my paper so I could save trees. So what this is Paul writing to Timothy to encourage him to honor widows. This was important back in the day because women didn't really have rights back then. So if a woman was married and then her husband died, she didn't really have a way to provide for herself. And so throughout all of the Old Testament, God makes a way for women to be provided for in these events. But also along the way is that we people continually flip that on its head and use that to do evil things. But notice how prior to this, prior to Paul's exhortation or encouragement to honor widows, he equates everyone as family to Timothy. He says, older men are fathers, younger men are brothers. Older women are mothers, younger women are sisters. And that means that whenever Paul wraps this thing up, it bears a lot of weight. And he wraps it up with this in verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So, in other words, not providing for your relatives is worse than being an unbeliever. Just let that sink in for a minute. In other words, what we should get from this is God cares very much that we care for other people. And this responsibility falls primarily to the men, to us as men. In the same way that Adam bore the responsibility of Eve to protect him, and that when she sinned, God came to him first, so do we bear the responsibility to provide for and protect the people around us. So we bear that responsibility, but it's a primary responsibility, not a sole responsibility. So let me clarify some things. I'm not advocating that in a marriage the wife shouldn't work. I'm not advocating that the wife should even make less than the husband. But what I am advocating is if a family doesn't have what they need, that responsibility falls on the husband. That men are accountable for the lack of provision and protection for those around us. So we provide things, but it's not just physical things. We do provide physical safety. So we should care about the safety of those around us. I don't know if you've ever been around, I don't know would be a great example. I don't know if you've ever been in a large group of people and you see some of your female friends and then this creepy guy kind of wanders into the circle. And I don't know if you've ever witnessed that, and if you've ever just stepped in that circle, it really shuts down whatever he was trying to do. That's a great way to keep the women in our lives safe. It's just to be present and aware in that way. So we should care about physical safety, but we also bear the responsibility for spiritual provision and protection. So what that looks like in reference to a marriage is discipleship in the family. That whenever you get married and you have a family, you have the responsibility to make sure that the word is a part of your family, that God is a part of your family. But even outside of that, we are responsible to advocate for truth. So if Brian gets up on a Sunday morning and starts preaching some whack theology, we should be the ones to take initiative and bring Brian aside. And again, in a benevolent, kind, well-meaning way, not in a harsh way, ask him what's going on. Or if we see someone reading a book by Creflo Dollar with just some interesting ideas, interesting flavors, we should ask them about what's going on or what's happening with that. We should advocate for truth. The third way that we protect and provide is emotionally. We do that through encouragement. Encouraging one another is super important. But also, one of the ways you can protect, especially women and the ladies of Epic, is through communication and clarification. So what I mean by that is say that you are in a class and you don't know anyone in the class except for one person that you kind of know, but you kind of don't. She's in Epic, you know that. And so because you're both in Epic, you sit by each other, and through the whole term you develop this friendship, and you don't really see each other outside of class in Epic, but you develop a friendship regardless. And when finals come around, you decide to team up and study for this final together. And so you stay up late and study to the wee hours of the night. And to you, that's just like a purely platonic, we're just friends, we're studying, helping each other out. But to her, just because of the way that girls' minds work differently than ours, that could send signals to her that aren't there and create fantasies for her that set her up to be hurt. And so it's important to clarify intentions and communicate intentions. And that is a form of emotional protection. So we have these responsibilities to lead, provide for, and protect, but who are they towards specifically? That's women. So next slide. Women in ways appropriate to a man's relationship. So there's 3 ways that a man relates to a woman according to the Bible. And we pointed 2 of them out in 1 Timothy. That 1 Timothy 2 passage. Older women are wives. Older women are mothers. Older women aren't wives. Older women are mothers. Younger women are sisters. And then the third category is wives. And wives are different because you've made some promises to each other. And so if you're not married to a girl, she's either your mother or your sister. So think about that next time you go on a date. She's either your mother or your sister. Until you've made some promises and she's your wife. And so we have these relationships. We still bear these same responsibilities. We just carry them out differently. To give you an example of this, my wife works in the nursery. She serves in the nursery. And if, say, one of you were serving in the nursery, that would be super cool. And you notice she's having a really bad day. She's been thrown up on 3 times and is just really frustrated. She didn't have coffee this morning. That usually gets her. And so I would hope, as her husband, I would hope you would go and see if she needs anything. Maybe say something nice to encourage her. But if you saw that she's having a bad day and you left after you're serving in the nursery and bought her flowers and wrote her a really encouraging card or a letter or something and gave those to her and then took her out to dinner to get sushi, which is her comfort food of choice, and then stayed up all night texting her how great she is and encouraging her, we would have some major problems. So don't do that. But you see, the difference in the relationship, the responsibility is still there, but we carry it out differently. even if you shouldn't do that whole flower thing, even if it's not my wife, if it's even if they're not married, that conveys a lot of messages that don't need to be there. So, yeah, we bear the responsibility, but it carries out according to the relationship. But honestly, this definition specifies women because that's what this book is about. It's talking about men and women and their differences in the way they relate to each other. But if Jesus said the greatest commandment is to love God, the second commandment is to love our neighbors as ourselves. And in a later story in Luke, Jesus is asked, "Who's my neighbor?" And short form of that story, or the short answer to that, is Jesus says, "Who the person in need." So I believe that this extends to not just women, but to anyone who's in need, anyone who's behind us. We can lead, provide for, and protect. It's not exclusive to women, but it's exclusive to your brothers as well, your younger brothers. Okay, so this is the definition, the baseline I want to lay for you guys. Like I said, it was a lot. There's more to manhood than this. We could talk for weeks about this and not hit it all, but it's not less than this. So now that we have this, I want to put before you guys some disciplines in which to practice to grow in manhood. And if you've never heard of spiritual disciplines, or maybe you have, you just it's kind of a buzzword. Spiritual disciplines are meant to be a tool by which you grow in a relationship. They're not the means of a relationship. So if, as I'm going through these, you just get this feeling, this weight that thinks, "Oh man, I really suck at this." If that is like a condemning feeling, that's called shame. That's a lie from the enemy, and you need to kill it by talking it out with someone. But if that weight you feel, it's like, I really suck at this, I need to do better, let that push you towards actually being better at these things. Remember, this is not the end goal, but it's a means to the end goal, which is knowing God. So the first discipline I want to tell you guys is honestly kind of a cop-out, kind of cheating, but it's spiritual intimacy. It's cheating because it's like a lot of spiritual disciplines fall under this umbrella, but this concept is incredibly essential. We see that in John 15, 4 through 6. Jesus says, "Abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself, unless it abides in the vine. Neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, it is he that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered and thrown to the fire and burnt." So you can only bear fruit as long as you're a part of the vine, right? If you cut a tree, or if you cut a tree branch off of the tree, that tree branch dies. So in the same way, if we want to grow in manhood and biblical manhood, then we have to be a part of the vine. We have to abide in Christ. And it's not just a gaining knowledge and knowing about Jesus, but it's knowing him intimately. And the way that we do these things is through time in the Word and time in prayer primarily. I know if you're like me, you've been told you need to read the Bible and pray since you're 8 years old, and sometimes it feels like such a chore. But think of it like this: the Bible is how we know God and how we know ourselves, and prayer is communicating with the God that we know. It's really stupid to start a relationship with someone and never talk to them again, right? So in the same way, we have to continually commune with God in this way. But that's not the only way you grow in spiritual intimacy. The other way is honestly doing anything that excites your affections for God. Like I said, I really love hiking. And there's so many times where I'm on a hike and I just feel so close to God. And for you, that could be writing music, doing art, reading books, whatever it is, do that thing with God. And you'll grow in intimacy with him, and he'll be a part of your life in every way. The next discipline I want to put before you guys is integrity. And integrity is this idea of being the same through and through. And so if you act one way when you're in epic, and then act another way in secret, you're not being, you don't have integrity. And let me tell you, God cares more about what happens inside of you than he does outside of you. We see this in Matthew 23, 25, and 26. Brian preached out of this a couple weeks ago. He says, "Woe to the scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside is full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup and plate, the outside also may be clean." So in other words, we clean the inside first. If you clean the inside first, you'll clean the outside. And another place in Matthew, Jesus says that out of the heart, what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart. So what comes to the outside, what is shown on the outside, proceeds from the inside. So if we want to be men, we have to be the same through and through. We have to be clean on the inside. And one of the things this means is that we have to take sin seriously. If you wonder why prominent leaders fall to sin, I think one reason is because they don't take sin seriously. They think and in a way, probably not super consciously, they think they're above sin. So they let little sins slide, but those little sins eventually build up and devour them. Because the secret about sin is there's no such thing as a little sin. All sin is the same at its core. Jeremiah 2:13 says that Jeremiah 2:13 says something to the effect. He's talking about the sins of Israel. It says that Israel has committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living life. This is God talking, it's not me. He's forsaken me, the fountain of living life. And they have dug out for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. So in other words, all of the sin of Israel was brought down to two things: turning away from God and turning to something else. And that's idolatry, right? That's putting something else in front of God that shouldn't be there. So from everything from sexual sin to something that seems so small as gluttony or laziness or apathy, all of that is the same. So if you struggle with worry or pride, or like I said, you're apathetic towards what God's called you to do, James 4:17 says that if you don't do the good you know you should do, then that is sin. And how often do we know we should do something, but we don't? And you think, the world's still spinning, it's okay. All of that is the same, and all of that we should take seriously. Because without taking that seriously and fighting that through confessing it to our brothers, confessing it to the Lord, because he's faithful to forgive, and trusting in the power of Jesus to save us from that sin, then we will never be clean on the inside. So integrity is important to masculinity, to manhood. You have to be the same through and through. You have to fight sin and take it seriously. The last discipline, and I promise this is coming to a close. The last discipline I want to put for you guys is stewardship. Like when God made Adam, his life was not his own. Your life is not your own. Everything that you have in your life, even the breath in your lungs, God has given to you to use for him. We see this in the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, which I'll summarize for you guys quickly. This is a pretty well-known story. A master leaves, and he leaves for his 3 servants various amounts of talents, which is just money. And 2 of the servants go and invest it, and it doubles back, and 1 servant buries it. So the master comes and collects, and the 2 servants are praised and rewarded. The master says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." The servant that went and buried his 1 talent, he comes back to the master, and the master curses him and casts him into the place of weeping and gnashing of teeth, which sounds horrific. So in other words, if we want to be rewarded in heaven, if we want to enter the joys of our masters, we need to use what God has given us well. So what has God given you? He's given you time, treasure, and talents, or time, talents, and treasure. Believe it or not, you have the most free time in your life than you ever will right now. I didn't believe it when I was in your position, because I was really busy as a college student. But now that I'm not in college, I really envy those days. And honestly, if you don't feel like you have free time, there's a good chance you just don't use it well. But what could you use your time for right now? What could God be calling you to do? What relationships could he be calling you to make? What mission trips should he be calling you to go on? One of my regrets in college is never spending a summer on mission. I had the opportunity every summer to go somewhere for 2 months and to serve God, and I just never did. And if I could go back, I would do that in a heartbeat. But you have that opportunity now. Well, maybe not now because of COVID, but still. What time could you be using? And even if you truly don't have free time, you still have the time in your jobs and in your classes that God has given you. How can you leverage them? How can you leverage those things for his kingdom? Next is your talents. God has uniquely gifted you to do something for his kingdom. But not only has he gifted you to do something for his kingdom, but he's gifted you to teach somebody else how to do something for his kingdom. I have a friend, one of my mentors back in Texas, used to always say this about the gospel. He said, the gospel came to me on its way to somebody else. And I think that's true about every gift that God gives us, that it comes to us on its way to somebody else. So there's always someone ahead of you, and there's always someone behind you. Take every moment as a teaching moment and invest in someone behind you. Thirdly, God has given you treasure. Cody talked about this last week, that you have money and you have possessions that God has given you. How can you leverage those for his kingdom? And I'm not necessarily telling you to go sell everything you have and give it to the poor. Only God can tell you to do something like that. But what is how you use your money and your possessions tell other people about your heart? Because Matthew 6 says that where your treasure lies, there your heart will be also. So these are the 3 disciplines. Again, if you feel a weight that you just really suck at any of these things, don't let that condemn you, but let it push you forward. So as we go from here tonight and for the rest of this retreat, build on this foundation. And again, manhood is something in which to grow in. I just threw a lot of information at you guys. If it feels really daunting, know that only thing you have to do is to take one step. What is one step that you can take coming from this tonight to grow into manhood? And also know that you're not alone. One, there's many of you in this room that are in this together. We're all in this together. We're all growing in this together. But also know that it is not by our power alone that we can grow in manhood, but it's only through God and his power. And his power is inside you through the Holy Spirit. I want to end with this encouragement from Philippians 1:6. Paul writes this to the church of Philippi in reference to sanctification. But he says, I am sure of this, that he who has begun a good work in you will bring it to completion in the day of Jesus Christ. And in a similar way, I'm confident that if we continue to look to God to define what a man should be, who we should be as men, and we rely on his strength to live that out, then we will be who he intended us to be. So I'm gonna pray for us, and then I think Jason's gonna come up and tell us what's next. So pray with me. God, thank you so much for your word and the way that you tell us how to live by it. God, thank you so much for the calling you've laid on our lives to live for a higher purpose and a higher calling than ourselves. But God, thank you for the responsibility you give us and the power that you give us to bring it out, to live it out. God, thank you for Christ and dying for us, for making a way for us to be in relationship with you. Lord, it is only by your blood on the cross that we are able to live. And so, God, I pray that you would grow us by your Spirit and your power to be the men that you created us to be. Would you continue to grow us in an understanding of what it means to be a man and how to live that out in each of our own lives and every relationship we're in? God, would you help us to use everything you've given us well? Would we not waste the gifts you've given us? Would we not waste the responsibility and the authority you've given us in life? Lord, you're really good to us. And I thank you for these men in this room. Lord, I pray all of this in your name and for your glory, Jesus. Amen.